The operating room was too quiet for what was happening outside. No alarms. No shouting. Just the low hum of anesthesia and the slow drip of blood into a suction canister. Down the corridor, boots hit tile. Radios crackled once, then went silent. A steel door slammed. Someone yelled for a nurse. Not by name. Just nurse. She stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, hands steady under running water. No rank. No urgency in her face. Just a woman in scrubs, mid-shift, ignored until the moment everything tightened. An officer burst through the OR doors and froze. The layout. The patient. The unsecured angles. She did not look up right away. When she did, she said only one sentence. After that, the room changed. And the officers realized, too late, that they had misjudged who was in control. The operating room clock ticked without sound. Second hand steady. Red sweep light reflected faintly off stainless steel. The patient was already under. Draped. Still. Only the monitor spoke, slow, regular, indifferent to the rest of the hospital. She stood on the patient's left side, adjusting the 4-line by touch alone. No glance at the screen. She already knew what it would say. Her movements were economical, almost minimal, like she was conserving something that did not need to be spent yet. Someone else might have filled the silence with chatter. She did not. She checked the suction canister, then the airway seal. One finger rested there a second longer than necessary. Satisfied, she stepped back into position. Hands folded. Waiting. To anyone watching, she was just the nurse assigned to the room. No title beyond that. No visible seniority. Her badge clipped low, partially hidden by her scrub top. No one had bothered to read it anyway. Across the glass, 2 officers stood near the double doors. They had been there for 20 minutes. Arms crossed. Radios clipped high on their shoulders. They were waiting for something that had nothing to do with surgery. One of them glanced into the room and then away again. His attention slid past her without stopping. The surgeon entered late, pulling on gloves as he walked. He nodded at the anesthesiologist, ignored the officers entirely. "Where are we?" he asked. "Stable," the anesthesiologist replied. "No changes." She did not repeat it. She did not need to. The surgeon scrubbed in. The procedure resumed. Metal touched metal. The rhythm returned. Outside, something shifted. The nurse felt it before she heard it. A change in pressure. Sound carrying where it shouldn't. Voices moving faster than they had been. One officer raised his radio closer to his mouth, then stopped. Listened. Static. The nurse adjusted the overhead light by 3 degrees. The surgeon did not notice. The beam now avoided reflecting off the glass wall. From the hallway, the room looked darker. She checked the crash cart seal. Intact. She turned it a few inches so the handle faced inward. No one commented. A distant door slammed. Not hard. Not violent. Just closed with intention. The officers straightened. One stepped closer to the OR doors, peering through the window now. His eyes lingered longer this time, scanning the room like it was terrain instead of workspace. The nurse did not look back at him. Her focus stayed on the patient's chest rise. On the cadence of breath. On the faint vibration in the floor that did not belong to HVAC. The anesthesiologist frowned at the monitor. "That's odd." "What?" the surgeon asked, distracted. "Nothing yet," he said. "Just watching." She shifted her weight. Barely noticeable. One foot angled slightly outward. If someone had known what to look for, they might have recognized it as a habit formed in narrow spaces. A voice echoed down the corridor. Raised. Not shouting. But close. Hey, stop. The sound cut off. The officers moved at once. One keyed his radio again. Nothing. He knocked once on the door, sharp and impatient. We might need to clear this room, he said through the glass. The surgeon looked up, annoyed. We're in the middle of. The nurse raised her hand. Not high. Just enough to pause him. Give us a minute, she said. Her voice was calm. Flat. Unemotional. The officer hesitated. Something in the way she said it slowed him, though he could not have said why. A minute for what? He asked. She did not answer immediately. She stepped closer to the door, close enough that only he could hear her through the glass. To finish what can't be stopped, she said. And to keep this room quiet. He studied her face. Expecting fear. Or confusion. Or resistance. He found none of it. Behind him, another door closed somewhere deeper in the wing. This one heavier. Magnetized. The nurse turned back to the patient. Adjusted the drape. Checked the line again. The surgeon exhaled sharply. What's going on out there? She did not look at him. Something moving toward us, she said. Not fast yet. That made him pause. Outside, the officer took a step back from the door. He did not know why he did it. Only that the room suddenly felt occupied in a way it hadn't before. The nurse returned to her place. Hands steady. Eyes forward. The oar remained quiet. But it was no longer unguarded. The hospital had its own language. Most people only heard it when something broke. She heard it when something changed. The ventilation shifted first. Not the sound, its rhythm. Air moved differently when doors sealed where they normally stayed open. She noticed the delay between breaths, the way the sealing vents compensated without being told. She adjusted the patient's oxygen flow by half a notch. The anesthesiologist glanced at the monitor, then at her. Was that necessary? He asked quietly. It will be, she said. That was all. Down the hall, a gurney rolled past too quickly, pushed by a single orderly instead of two. His eyes stayed forward. His shoulders were tight. He did not slow near the oar like people usually did. He moved like someone trying not to be remembered. One of the officers spoke again, this time into nothing. He tapped his radio with his knuckle. Tried a different channel. Still static. Command? He said. Or wing, do you copy? Nothing answered. The nurse watched his reflection in the glass. The way his jaw set. The way his stance widened without him realizing it. She had seen that posture before, people preparing without admitting they were preparing. The surgeon cleared his throat. We need to know if this is going to interrupt us. The nurse finally looked at him. Not sharply. Not urgently. Just directly. If it does, she said, it will be because someone forces it. That earned her a look. Not anger. Confusion. She returned her attention to the room. Counted the staff. 4 total. 2 would freeze if pushed too hard. 1 would panic late. 1 would follow instructions if they were clear and confident. She positioned herself closer to the wall where the supply cabinets met the reinforced paneling. It looked incidental. It wasn't. Another sound carried through the structure. A dull impact. Not metal. Not glass. Flesh against something solid. Someone losing control of space. The anesthesiologist swallowed. That wasn't a cart. No, she agreed. The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one reached for the door handle, then stopped when the older officer raised a hand. Wait, the older one said. He leaned closer to the glass, lowering his voice. Ma'am, has anyone entered this wing besides staff? No, she said. Anyone supposed to? No. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then, almost unconsciously, he shifted his body so he was no longer standing directly in front of the door. He gave himself an angle. She noted it. Approved of it. Did not say so. The lights flickered once. Not a failure. A test. The emergency system checking whether it was needed. She reached up and turned one of the overhead surgical lights off completely. The surgeon opened his mouth to object. It's glare, she said calmly. We don't need it yet. He hesitated, then accepted it. The field remained visible. The corners of the room fell into shadow. Outside, a distant alarm began to sound, cut off almost immediately. Someone had silenced it manually. That's not protocol, the younger officer muttered. No, the nurse said. It isn't. She moved to the cabinet near the door and unlocked it. Inside were standard supplies. She removed a roll of sterile drape and placed it within arm's reach of the officer's side of the room. Not hiding it. Not offering it. Just making it available. The older officer noticed. His eyes flicked to it, then back to her. You expecting contamination? He asked. I'm expecting disruption, she said. Those are different. Another radio crackled briefly, someone else's channel bleeding through. A fragment of a voice. Urgent. Cut short. The hospital felt smaller now. Corridors narrowing. Options disappearing. The surgeon's hands slowed. If we have to stop. We won't, she said. He looked at her again. Really looked this time. Why are you so sure? He asked. She did not answer immediately. She checked the patient's vitals again. Perfectly controlled. She adjusted nothing. Because whatever is happening, she said, hasn't reached us yet. As if in response, the magnetized doors at the far end of the wing engaged. The sound carried through the floor, a deep, final thud. The younger officer cursed under his breath. We're sealed in, he said. The nurse nodded once. Yes. The older officer exhaled slowly. That wasn't ordered. No, she said again. It wasn't. She stepped closer to the door now. Close enough that the officers could hear her without raising their voices. If someone comes down this hall, she said, you will hear them before you see them. Do not open this door unless I say so. The words landed heavier than their volume suggested. The older officer hesitated. Then nodded. She returned to her place by the patient. The oar continued its work. Outside, something began moving with intent. The first official order arrived late. Not over the intercom. Not through the proper channels. It came as a voice shouting from the stairwell, distorted by distance and concrete. Lock it down, now. The rest was lost to echo. The officers stiffened. The younger one reached for the door handle again, instinct overriding caution. The older officer stopped him with a firm grip on the forearm. Wait, he said. We don't know from who. The nurse was already moving. She crossed to the wall panel near the anesthesia station and checked the access indicator. Red. No override available from inside. Someone else had control of the wing. She said nothing about it. The surgeon's voice tightened. What does that mean for us? It means, the anesthesiologist said, we're not supposed to be here. The nurse adjusted the patient's arm, securing it more firmly to the board. Her fingers pressed once, checking circulation. Still good. It means, she said calmly, we finish. The younger officer shook his head. Ma'am, with respect, if there's an active threat, this room needs to clear. Clear to where? She asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. The older officer studied her. You're saying we ride this out? I'm saying, she replied, you don't move a critical patient through unsecured space unless the risk behind you is greater than the risk ahead. And how would you know that? The younger officer snapped. She met his eyes. Held them. Not challenging. Not defensive. Because if the risk were already here, she said, we wouldn't be having this conversation. A heavy impact sounded down the hall. Closer this time. Something hit a door hard enough to rattle the glass in its frame. The anesthesiologist flinched. The surgeon froze mid-motion. The nurse did not move at all. Contact, the younger officer said, drawing his weapon halfway before remembering where he was. He lowered it again, breathing faster now. The older officer spoke into his radio again. Command, we have movement near or 3. Repeat, movement. Only static answered. The nurse stepped between the officers and the door. Not blocking them. Just occupying the space naturally, like she belonged there. You fire in here, she said quietly, and you will kill someone who cannot move. Neither officer argued that. The older one rubbed his jaw. We need guidance. You need time, she corrected. I can give you that. Another impact. This one followed by a voice. Male. Strained. Not shouting words, just sound. Breath forced through pain or effort. The younger officer's knuckles whitened on his weapon. That's close. Yes, she said. She reached for the roll of sterile drape she had placed earlier and pulled it free. With quick, precise movements, she taped it over the lower half of the door window, leaving only a narrow horizontal strip at eye level. The surgeon stared at her. What are you doing? Limiting information, she replied. For both sides. The older officer nodded slowly. He had not thought of that. She adjusted the room lights again, dimming them further. The door now looked like a dark box from the corridor. Hard to read. Hard to assess. Another order came, this one through a handheld radio carried by someone running. All units, fall back. A gunshot cracked. Close. Not in the wing, but close enough that everyone felt it in their chest. The surgeon swore under his breath. The nurse leaned toward the anesthesiologist. Can you maintain this level for another 12 minutes? Yes, he said, after a beat. But if something spikes? It won't, she said. Not yet. The older officer looked at her sharply. You keep saying that. She did not answer him. Footsteps approached fast now. One set. Heavy. Uneven. The younger officer took position on the side of the door, training his weapon toward the narrow window strip. Don't, the nurse said. He hesitated. Ma'am. If he sees you, she continued, he will know what he's facing. If he doesn't, he may hesitate. And if he doesn't, the officer asked. Then you will still be standing where you are, she said. But quieter. The footsteps slowed outside the door. A shadow passed across the narrow window strip. Breathing. Ragged. Close enough to hear without amplification. The nurse placed one hand flat against the door. Not pushing. Just feeling. Hold, she said. Everyone did. The shadow lingered. Shifted. Moved on. Only when the sound faded did the nurse remove her hand. The younger officer exhaled shakily. How did you know? She finally looked at him again. Because, she said, people who are hunting move differently than people who are running. Silence settled back into the oar. For now. The silence did not mean safety. It meant the shape of the threat had changed. The nurse returned to the instrument table and checked the layout without touching anything. She memorized what was where. What could be moved quietly? What could not? The surgeon resumed, hands steady but slower now, as if the air itself had thickened. Outside the oar, the officers repositioned. No longer standing straight. No longer waiting to be told. They were adapting. The younger officer leaned close to the doorframe, keeping his profile narrow. He doubled back, he whispered. I heard him turn. Yes, the nurse said. He's listening. The word settled uneasily. Another sound reached them, metal scraping lightly against tile. Something being dragged. Deliberate this time. The older officer frowned. He's barricading. No, she said. He's testing. She stepped toward the door again, this time opening the small access panel near the handle. Inside was the manual release lever for internal emergencies. She did not pull it. She just rested her fingers on it, measuring the resistance. The younger officer watched her hands. You can override it? For seconds, she replied. Not minutes. That's all we'd need, he said. No, she corrected. That's all you'd think you need. The sound outside stopped. Then came a knock. Not frantic. Not loud. 3 measured taps. Knuckle on reinforced glass. The surgeon froze completely. The anesthesiologist whispered, "Do not answer that." The nurse raised one finger. A signal for silence. She stepped closer to the door, aligning herself so the narrow uncovered strip of glass showed only part of her face. Operating room, she said evenly. This area is sterile. A pause. A man's voice answered. Calm. Controlled, but stretched thin. I'm hurt. She waited. Did not respond immediately. How hurt? She asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Enough, the voice said. The older officer's jaw tightened. He shook his head slightly at her, a silent warning. She did not look at him. Where? She asked. Leg, the voice replied. I can't stand. She nodded once, though he could not see it. Then you shouldn't be moving. The younger officer shifted his grip on his weapon. The nurse noticed it without turning. Ma'am, the voice said again, closer now. Please. The word was chosen carefully. She leaned closer to the glass. If you are injured, she said, you will sit down. Slowly. You will show me your hands through the window. Silence. The officers held their breath. Footsteps moved. A body lowering. A shape appeared at the bottom of the narrow window strip, hands first. Empty. Shaking slightly. The nurse studied them. The angle of the wrists. The tension in the fingers. Lower, she said. The hands dropped out of sight. A sudden movement, too fast, too sharp, followed by the scrape of something hard against the door. The younger officer lunged forward. Don't, she said sharply. The older officer caught his arm just in time. The door rattled once. Hard. A shoulder this time. The sound carried through the room like a shockwave. The nurse pulled the internal release halfway. Not enough to disengage. Just enough to create slack. On my count, she said quietly. You will open the door 1 inch. No more. The older officer stared at her. That's insane. It's controlled, she replied. There's a difference. The surgeon whispered, what are you doing? Buying space, she said. Another impact hit the door. Weaker this time. Frustration creeping in. She counted silently. Not seconds. Breaths. Now, she said. The older officer cracked the door exactly as instructed. 1 inch. No more. The nurse spoke through the gap. You're bleeding more by the second, she said. Sit down. Lean against the wall. Do it now. A ragged breath answered. A body slid down outside. She nodded to the officer. Close it. The door sealed again. The hallway went quiet except for breathing on the other side. The younger officer stared at her. You just disarmed him. No, she said. I redirected him. She returned to the patient without another word. Behind the sealed door, something shifted. Not forward. Not aggressive. Waiting. Waiting was a decision. She made it deliberately. The nurse moved through the OR with purpose now, no longer pretending her actions were incidental. Still calm. Still measured. But there was a shape to what she was doing that the others could feel, even if they could not name it. She spoke softly, not to command, but to align. Dr. Hayes, she said to the surgeon, I need your table locked at this height. He complied without question. Sarah, she said to the circulating nurse, stand by the anesthesia cart. If I tell you to move, you move without asking why. Sarah nodded, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. She swallowed and steadied herself. The anesthesiologist watched her closely now. You've done this before, he said. She did not answer. Outside the door, the breathing had slowed. Controlled. The man had stopped trying to force entry. That worried her more than the impacts had. She rolled the instrument table 3 inches to the left. Just enough to create a narrow channel between it and the wall. The older officer noticed. Funnel, he murmured. She glanced at him for the first time with something like acknowledgement. Yes, she said. The younger officer shifted his stance to match the new geometry without being told. He was learning. Fast. She dimmed the lights another fraction and turned on the surgical headlamp, angling it toward the door at knee height. Anyone entering would be blinded below the line of sight, not above it. Why low? The younger officer whispered. Eyes follow threat, she replied. We want them looking down. The man outside coughed. Wet. Real. The nurse's jaw tightened briefly. Not sympathy. Calculation. She knelt beside the crash cart and loosened the locking brake without moving it. The wheels would roll silently now, if needed. A voice came from the other side of the door. Weaker. Still controlled. I'm not armed, he said. I just need help. The older officer looked to her again. He was deferring now, whether he meant to or not. She did not answer the man immediately. Instead, she turned to the anesthesiologist. If we lose power in this room, she said, how long until you need light? 30 seconds, he replied. Maybe less. She nodded. Use your hands. I'll give you time. He blinked. Time for what? For them, she said, nodding toward the officers, to finish it. The younger officer swallowed. Finish what? She finally answered the voice outside. You're asking us to open this door, she said. If we do, you will bleed less for a moment and everyone else will be at risk. That includes you. Silence. I can help you, she continued. But only if you stay where you are. A long breath answered. Then a low laugh. Bitter. Fading. You sound very sure, the man said. I am, she replied. The older officer leaned closer to her. We have tactical units en route, he whispered. We just need to hold. She shook her head slightly. They won't make it in time. He frowned. You don't know that. I do, she said. Because if they were close enough, you'd already hear them. As if summoned by her words, a distant thump echoed through the structure. Not footsteps. Not running. Rotor wash. The younger officer's eyes widened. Helicopter? Rooftop, she said. Not ours. The man outside the door went still. The nurse's expression did not change, but something hardened behind it. She stepped back into the center of the room, placing herself between the door and the patient. Not dramatically. Just naturally, as if that had always been her place. If he moves again, she said quietly, you will let me handle it. The older officer hesitated. Then nodded. The room held its breath. The OR was no longer just a workspace. It was a perimeter. The helicopter did not land gently. It never did. The vibration rolled through the building in low waves, rattling fixtures, stirring dust from places no one ever cleaned. The surgical lights trembled. The patient's monitor flickered, then stabilized. The anesthesiologist tightened his grip. That's going to spike him. It won't, the nurse said. Not if you breathe with him. He did. In. Out. Matching the rhythm she set without realizing it. Outside the OR, the man shifted. Not toward the door this time. Away from it. The nurse felt the change through the floor more than she heard it. He knows, the younger officer whispered. About the helicopter. Yes, she said. Which means he also knows he's running out of options. A voice crackled faintly through the older officer's radio. Broken. Incomplete. Units en route, suspect armed, repeat. The transmission died. The older officer cursed under his breath. They're telling us to engage. They don't know what room they're standing in, the nurse replied. Another impact hit the door. Not from the suspect. From the outside, down the hall, boots. Multiple. Fast. Coordinated. The younger officer's eyes lit with relief. That's our people. No, the nurse said. Both officers turned to her. That cadence, she continued. Too tight. They're stacking. The footsteps stopped just short of the OR. A voice called out. Authoritative. Amplified slightly, but restrained. Police. If anyone is inside operating room 3, respond. The older officer stepped forward instinctively. The nurse placed a hand on his chest. Firm. Not aggressive. Don't answer yet, she said. He stared at her, conflicted. Those are my guys. Maybe, she said. Or maybe they're trying to draw the suspect out by forcing a response. The younger officer frowned. That's not our protocol. It is when command is blind, she replied. The voice outside repeated itself, louder now. Operating room 3. Identify yourselves. The man who had been breathing outside the door laughed softly. It was a broken sound. You hear that? He said. They're coming in. The nurse leaned toward the door, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. They won't, she said. Not yet. The helicopter noise intensified. Something heavy was being lowered onto the roof. Not personnel. Equipment. The nurse's eyes narrowed. That changed the math. She turned to the anesthesiologist. How long until closure? 8 minutes, he said. If nothing goes wrong. She nodded. Then nothing will. A sharp knock hit the OR door from the outside hallway. Official. Deliberate. OR 3, the voice said again. Open the door now. The older officer looked torn. Sweat beaded at his temple. They outrank me, he muttered. They outrank all of us, the nurse said. That doesn't mean they see everything. She stepped closer to the door and raised her voice slightly. This room is sterile and occupied, she said. You breach it, you risk the patient. A pause followed. Then, ma'am, step away from the door. She did not move. If you're law enforcement, the voice continued, you need to identify yourself. She smiled faintly. Not at the words. At the assumption behind them. You already know who I am, she said. You just don't know why I'm here. Silence. Behind the door, the wounded man shifted again. The sound of fabric tearing reached them, him tightening something around his leg. Preparing. The nurse's jaw set. She turned to the older officer. When they come through that door, she said, they will look for uniforms. Not scrubs. They will move past me. He understood instantly. You want to draw them. I want to slow them, she corrected. There's a difference. That puts you in the line, he said. Yes. The surgeon looked up sharply. Absolutely not. She met his eyes. For the first time, something like apology flickered there. If this goes wrong, she said, it goes wrong for one person. Not 5. The helicopter noise cut abruptly. The hallway lights outside the OR went dark. Emergency red glows snapped on instead. The voice outside the door spoke again, tighter now. Less confident. OR 3. Final warning. The nurse reached for the door handle. The officers tensed. She did not open it. She locked it, fully this time. Everyone froze. The surgeon whispered, "What did you just do?" She exhaled slowly. "I chose the room." From the other side of the door, both threats reacted at once. And the next moment would cost her something no one else could pay. The lock engaged with a sound too soft to be dramatic. A simple click. Final. Outside the OR, confusion rippled. Orders collided with instinct. Someone struck the door once, hard, then stopped, as if realizing force would only make things worse. The wounded man laughed again. Louder this time. Closer to hysteria. "You just trapped us all," he said. The nurse did not answer him. She stepped back from the door slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed. No challenge in her body language. No fear either. She positioned herself exactly where the overhead light cast the least shadow on her face. The officers watched her, stunned. "You locked command out," the younger one said. "Yes," she replied. "They'll breach." "Not yet," she said. "They'll argue first." As if on cue, raised voices filtered through the door. Not shouting. Disbelief. Someone demanding an override code that did not exist for this side of the wing. The nurse turned her attention inward again. The patient's vitals dipped, slightly. Nothing dramatic. But enough. She adjusted the medication without asking. The anesthesiologist caught her eye, hesitated, then nodded and followed her lead. The surgeon said nothing. His hands moved faster now. Trust replacing questions. Behind the door, the wounded man's breathing changed. Shallow. Faster. He was losing blood despite his effort to stop it. The nurse knelt, bringing herself closer to the floor. Closer to where sound carried. "You're getting colder," she said through the door. "You can feel it in your hands." Silence. "I know," he said finally. "I can't stop it." "No," she agreed. "You can't." The younger officer stiffened. "You can't talk him into surrender." "I'm not," she said. "I'm talking him into stillness." She rested her back against the wall, just beside the door. Close enough that a breach would put her directly in the path. The older officer's voice dropped. "That's a bad place to be." "Yes," she said. "Which is why they won't rush it." The wounded man slid fully down the wall outside. They could hear it now, the dull finality of a body giving in to gravity. "I didn't plan this," he said quietly. "It just kept going." "I know," she replied. "You sound like you know a lot," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. "Enough." Outside, command voices sharpened. A tool struck the door frame experimentally. Not enough to breach. Just enough to measure. The nurse spoke again, timing it between sounds. "If you move," she said to the man, "they will respond. And they won't be careful." A long breath. Then another. "I don't want to die on this floor," he said. "Then don't," she replied. "Stay exactly where you are." Another pause. "I can't feel my foot," he said. "That means you're doing the right thing," she said. The officers exchanged looks. They were no longer in charge. They knew it. And somehow, they were relieved. A voice outside the door broke through the confusion, older, steadier. "Stand down," it said. "Hold position." The tool stopped striking. The wounded man exhaled a long, shuddering breath. "They listened to you. They listened to the situation," she said. "I just made it visible." She remained where she was. Did not move to the patient. Did not seek cover. The patient stabilized. Numbers crept back into safe territory. Minutes passed. Eventually, restraints clicked on the other side of the door. Not rushed. Controlled. Medical personnel arrived before weapons. Only then did the nurse rise. She unlocked the door and stepped back, allowing others to pass first. No one ordered her to move. No one thanked her. They simply followed her lead, without realizing they already had. The door opened fully for the first time in over an hour. Red emergency light spilled into the OR, washing the white walls with something darker, heavier. Voices filled the hallway now, measured, professional, restrained. No one rushed. No one raised a weapon. 2 tactical officers entered first, weapons low, eyes scanning. They moved past the nurse without a second glance. Exactly as she had said they would. Behind them came medical personnel in different scrubs. Different badges. Different posture. They moved straight toward the wounded man slumped against the wall. "He's alive," one of them said. "Barely." The nurse did not follow. She stayed inside the OR. The surgeon completed the final suture and leaned back slowly, exhaustion finally catching him. The anesthesiologist removed his gloves with shaking hands. "It's done," he said. "He'll make it." She nodded once. Relief flickered across her face for less than a second before it was gone again. The older officer stepped into the OR, eyes still alert, still cataloging angles even though the threat had passed. He looked at her differently now. Not curiosity. Recognition. "You held them," he said quietly. "Both sides." She wiped her hands at the sink. Water ran red, then clear. "I kept the room intact," she said. "That was my responsibility." He hesitated. "Command is going to ask questions." "Yes," she replied. "They're going to want names." She shut off the faucet. Dried her hands carefully. "They already have enough." In the hallway, a voice carried, authoritative, controlled, unmistakably senior. "Who secured the operating room?" The younger officer glanced instinctively toward her. She was already moving away, checking the patient one last time. Adjusting a blanket. Restoring the room to something resembling normal. The older officer answered instead. The situation resolved itself. A pause. "That's not how reports work," the voice said. "No," the officer replied. "But it's what happened." The nurse removed her gloves and dropped them into the bin. She unclipped her badge and placed it face down in her pocket. As she passed the officers, the younger one spoke. "Ma'am." She stopped. He struggled for words. I mean. She waited. Calm. Patient. He nodded once, sharp and respectful. "Thank you." She returned the nod. Nothing more. Outside, the helicopter lifted away, its noise fading into distance. The hospital's systems began resetting. Lights brightened. Doors unlocked. Life resumed. She walked down the corridor alone, blending back into the flow of staff responding to the aftermath. No escort. No acknowledgement. Just another nurse finishing a long shift. The hospital exhaled. Not all at once. System by system. Floor by floor. The emergency lights dimmed back to white. Magnetized doors released with soft clicks that barely registered anymore. Overhead pages resumed their neutral cadence, room numbers, supply requests, ordinary problems reclaiming space. The nurse walked the long way to the locker room. Not because it was faster. Because it kept her moving through populated corridors. People glanced at her and looked away again. No one stared. No one stopped her. She was exactly what she appeared to be, another staff member leaving the center of something she would not be part of afterward. In the locker room, she sat and removed her shoes carefully. Her hands trembled slightly now. Not from fear. From release. She rested her forearms on her knees and stayed that way for a moment longer than necessary. A radio crackled faintly somewhere down the hall. Voices discussing timelines. Liability. Jurisdiction. Words that mattered to people who needed them to matter. None of them reached her. She changed clothes slowly. Folded her scrubs instead of dropping them in the bin. A habit she never bothered to explain. When she stepped back into the hallway, the older officer was there. No weapon. No radio in his hand. Just standing, as if he had waited without knowing exactly for what. He did not block her path. "They're writing it up," he said. "They won't get it right." She adjusted her jacket. "They never do." He nodded. "Someone higher will notice." "Maybe," she said. "Not today." He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "If I asked." She shook her head once. Gentle. Final. "Don't," she said. "You don't want the answer. And I don't want to give it." That seemed to settle something in him. He straightened, instinctively. His hand lifted, not quite a salute. Something restrained. Something meant only for her. She acknowledged it with a small nod and continued on. Outside, dawn was beginning to thin the darkness. The parking structure smelled like oil and wet concrete. Ordinary. Solid. She paused beside her car and looked back once at the hospital. Lights steady. Windows intact. No sign of what had passed through its walls. That was how it should be. She got in, closed the door, and sat quietly as the engine turned over. No report would carry her name. No footage would show her face. The room had held. The patient had lived. That was enough. The hospital went on. So did she.